October winds are the coldest. After an unfulfilling day in the office, Jane thought a breath of fresh air would clear her mind. Despite working under a female supervisor, the competition was even stronger, despite Jane having returned from 6 months of medical leave. The sun set over the climbing skyscrapers, ricocheting deep hues of magenta and crimson across the brick office buildings. Jane crossed the cobblestone pathway by the Bohemian Garden across from Porter Boulevard, where she worked. It wasn't a very large park, but nonetheless gave locals and real estate a boost to their value. She had often admired the bridge, appearing as though dwarves carved it themselves. A lion face adorned the cornerstone of the bridge, surrounded by stony floral faces. Blank faces conveying neither fear nor joy, only an expression of silent resignation that they would be trapped on the bridge forever. She stopped to retie the laces on her Oxford shoes, bracing herself on the edge of the bridge. It would be twilight soon, and crossing the park usually took about 20 minutes, at a brisk pace. The constant ache of the office kneaded away as she trod across the uneven pathway. Quiet. The occasional whistle of a nearby sparrow. A sharp October breeze rustled the shrubbery lining the path. She ventured past the point where the trees opened to the business district and into the hollow tunnel of maple trees. The crunching of fallen leaves became melodic and easy to ignore. It had been 6 years since she had taken this particular route home. It had been the end of May. The noonday sun shone through the trees as she took her lunchtime stroll, having already eaten her apple and sandwich. It was in this next clearing that she had seen him. He had smiled at her riding by on his bicycle. He wore a dark brown suit and derby hat, tipping it to her as he slowed his bicycle to a walking pace. What a pleasant face he had. Another whisk of cold air blew against her arms, bidding her cross them. They had talked for quite some time, causing Jane to return late to work, but with the promise of meeting at the same place the next day. So they did. The ragged flap of wings startled her as a flock of crows soared from a tree. They cawed and swept away into the fading violet sky. Jane heard his low voice coaxing out her innermost secrets as she blushed uncontrollably. She felt his rough hands touch her rouge-smitten cheeks. It was that week that her supervisor called her into his office to lecture her for tardiness. Jane promised that it wouldn't happen again. And it was. She shook as the October wind swished against her polka-dotted skirt, raising goosebumps all down her body. He held her hand as they laughed together, him on his bicycle with her walking beside him. They had danced to him, singing an old jazz tune, partially blocking another cyclist on the pathway. She had danced out of the way with him. It had been their 6th meeting together. Jane wanted more. He wanted more. Her supervisor called her into his office, demanding to know what the cause for her distraction had been. Jane had flushed crimson, folding her arms behind her back. She had met someone whom she really liked. She recalled her supervisor's paled expression, followed by a sudden burning purple in his face, like a beet ready to burst. He told her to get out of his office. Confused by this sudden rage, she bolted to her desk in a stream of tears. Jane hurried along the path, drawing her eyebrows together. It had been 6 years. The man kissed her red lips, dipping her backwards in his rippling arms. Her supervisor had threatened to fire her the next day for being late again. Jane babbled between tears that it would be the last time. And it was. They had been taking their usual stroll along the path, Jane being very wary of time. He had seized her arm, insisting on showing her something. The man had bent down on one knee, revealing a velvet ring box. Jane's cry of joy and shock echoed merrily in his expectant ears. Jane stopped dead in the pathway. The red still stained the white roses amidst the shrubbery. A flurry of blood shot out of the man's chest as the knife powered back and forth, painting a scarlet stain on his freshly pressed jacket. A shower of blood spattered onto Jane's white dress. She screamed, her hands having not made the transition from excitement to utmost horror. The man fell to the ground, gurgling, eyes wide open. The stain stared her in the eye, like his eyes had. Bloody hands gripping her wrists. Screaming, being dragged along the pathway, a sweaty hand over her mouth. A heavy hand pinning hers to the dirty ground, away from the path. She beat and clawed at seemingly nothing but a wall. An explosion of pain surmounted in her left temple, then at her neck, only feeling the breeze across her belly, then an intense, sharp pain within her. A smothering pressure covered her. A throbbing rhythm surged, 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 and stopped. The air was still. Jane opened her eyes, breathing raggedly. The rusty taste of her lover's blood intermingled with her attacker's sweat. Salty, bitter, too afraid to cry, afraid to breathe. A sudden crack of a voice asking if she was all right. Being lifted up, feeling herself running, only it was not her legs that ran. Bright lights, masks hovering above her. Jane fell to her knees on the rusty stain, clutching herself in a desperate embrace, leaning forward as though pieces of him still remained. A silent sob, a mourning scream. She opened her eyes to white room, white masks and coats, white paper flapping about on clipboards, black ballpoint pens clicking away. She opened her eyes, hoping to see him on the pathway, brown derby hat in hand, brown eyes beckoning. Brown jacket wrapped around her thin shoulders. She sat up in the white bed, trying to think, focusing on moving air from her mouth to her insides, focusing on swallowing. 6 months went by. Minutes passed. Jane read the papers, reading her gender in headlines, seeing his face alongside condemning rhetoric and skeptical questions, reading dramatic interpretations of her doctor's words, typed alongside a journalist's career making delivery. She squinted as cameras flashed, feeling the orderly roll the wheelchair, staring at her home nurse as she tried sipping soup. A written apology from work, a personal visit from the owner, sitting numb through an attorney's advisements, sitting silently through the interrogations. A building scream as she recognized her attacker as her boss. Radio flickering with breaking news. A trial set. A jury selected. A unanimous verdict. A sentence announced. A cheer from the courtroom. Jane sat silently, as though an electric chair would ever bring back those brown eyes. Drinking a little at first to dull the aches. Drinking more at night to offset seeing his face in her sleep. Drinking alone to quench the burning violation given to the only one who knew her. Seeing her lover along the pathway. Feeling herself falling into an ocean of blood. Choking herself awake. Finally leaving the house. Finally talking back and forth with the middle-aged Jewish therapist who helped her sort through her nightmares. Breaking the barrier between reality and those fears that claw from the shadows with jaded teeth. Walking into the grocery store for the first time without being recognized. Returning to work for the first time since it all happened. Seeing the vortex of blood disappear on the cobblestone. And breathing. Breathing again. Breathing without it hurting. Breathing. Jane lifted her eyes from the pathway and blinked to clear the tears. It was dark. The lamplights along the pathway beamed, as though nodding in sympathy. Jane rose from her knees, adjusting the leather belt on her messenger bag. She wiped her nose on her hand, smearing it on her skirt. She kept breathing into the star-cast sky and let the crunch of autumn follow her home. We're lying on the floor of a stockroom in a gas station. Malia and I, the chubby, middle-aged clerk, and an older couple I've never met are lying face down on dirty cold floors, surrounded by the detritus of running a small convenience store on a highway. The young man with the gun, no older than 19 and fidgeting with the telltale spasms of a meth addict, is screaming. This is not how I wanted to spend my day. I search his mind incessantly. Nothing is where it's supposed to be. What do you fear? What do you love? What can stop you? It's hard with meth addicts. The meth makes everything a jumble of incoherent, random images. I'm nearly giving up when I find it a monster he's created. A fleshy, long-clawed beast with metallic teeth, dripping with black ichor. I glance over at Malia and nod. It's okay, I try to tell her with my face. I've got what I need. What I'm about to do requires a lot of energy. Fortunately, it's early in the evening, and we haven't been on the road long. I should be able to summon enough to do what I need to do. I lift myself slowly off the ground. The other 3 hostages scolding me in hushed yells. You're going to get killed, get down, don't be a hero. Malia calms them quietly and nods. Close your eyes and cover your ears, I whisper back. The young man, Josh is the name I've managed to garner from his racing mind, is rummaging through the locked case holding the OTC medicines behind the counter. He wants the pseudoephedrine and anything else he can get. The cash in the register will merely be an afterthought. My steps are slow and deliberate. He can't be allowed to see me until I've assumed the proper shape. It's finally transformed and I stare through the new beast's large, wet eyes. I snort loudly and growl softly. Josh sees me and everything drops. The items in his hands, his face, the contents of his bladder. He's pinned behind the counter. There's no way for to escape as I make my way slowly to him. The screams get louder and louder and I drift into his mind again. Your soul, my monster voice growls in his head. I know what you did to Cassie. I don't actually know what he did to Cassie. But I know she's in his brain and there's an immense amount of guilt swirling around her. There's a good chance he doesn't even remember what he did. He begins to wail. I keep pushing every button I find, keep morphing my beast body to suit his worst imaginings. I promised Malia years ago that the worst damage I do wouldn't be permanent, but would be enough to effectively disable them for their natural lives. It's a brutal task, but it makes everyone safer in the end. When I'm done, Josh is in the fetal position wailing incoherently. I'm back in my normal form and I'm exhausted. Sitting on the floor, propped up against the soda cooler. I call to Malia. It's all clear now. Everyone can come out. They creep slowly out of the room and stare at me wide-eyed. My color is gone, my lips are pale and big dark lines have taken up residence under my eyes. Josh has stopped screaming and is now whimpering softly to himself. I give the clerk a solemn look. You don't want the kind of attention telling the whole story will bring you, I tell him. Erase the security tape, then call the cops. Tell them it was a weird freak accident that happened with the tape. Tell them our friend over here just came into your store and lost his mind. He won't be able to tell them any different. He nods at me. He's frightened, but willing to trust me. The couple is staring at me with concern. You don't look good at all, the woman says, kneeling down by me. She's a mother, and my tiny pale frame and consumptive look is giving her pause. She needs to eat, preferably lots of protein. Malia explains. Malia knows the drill. She's been with me at this for a while. We can't stay here. I can't talk to the cops. Despite my abilities, I'm a terrible liar, and I don't like to do my mind trick on innocent bystanders. It feels like a violation. The clerk and the couple help Malia get me out to the car. The couple knows a diner not far and they want us to follow them there. They really need to talk about what happened. I trust Malia's instincts on this one, and she agrees to follow them. The diner is retro-looking more by lack of funds than aesthetics. Something you'd expect to find on a desert highway. The waitress is older and doesn't look twice at my sorry state. She's seen worse and isn't interested in finding out more. Her feet hurt and her bills are due. I order steak and eggs, with the steak cooked as rare as possible, and devour it in nearly one gulp when it arrives. The couple is remarkably calm for all they've witnessed, and I appreciate their stiff upper lip. The bloody meat, though a terrible cut, was enough to give me back my color and restore my energy. I eat my eggs like a normal human being. What do you want to know? I ask them. The husband, an older man who looks like he might work at the local branch of a bank, or maybe a kindly high school history teacher, clears his throat and whispers, "What are you?" I've been asked that before. When Malia first met me, when we were tiny youngsters, she asked me the same thing. I'm as human as you and the guy next to you, but with a major difference. I was born after my mother had been dead for about 5 minutes. She surprised a burglar who decided to stab her in the throat. I shouldn't have survived. Living things are not born of dead things, but it does happen. And when it does, those particles in the universe that are attracted to death, to miracles, to things which should not be, come and attach to whatever is left standing. That was me. Tiny, 2-week early neonate coffin birthed, going against all laws of natural order. Living with these forms swirling around you gives you perspective on things. Everything is charged particles and wavelengths. Every action in context has a unique charge and wavelength. Malice, love, lust, pain, joy, grief. There is no good or evil really, simply actions in context that emit an energy. Our energies impress on the energies around us and drift out into the world. I can manipulate these energies, though it saps a lot of my own to do it. My mind trick is merely an ability to read the wavelengths and charges in a brain. The secret had one part right. What you put out will affect you, or me. It most definitely will come back to me. I explain as scientifically as possibly, realizing they may think I'm absolutely insane. They seem to be taking it in well. Maybe they believe in the supernatural or new age bullshit. Either way, I'm grateful they are not freaking completely out. Not everyone handles it that well. My grandparents were not prepared for a newborn who would overload the breakers when she was wet or hungry, nor a toddler who would mess with the electronics for giggles. Knowing the two people you love the most are terrified of you is a lonely feeling, especially when you can't control it. My grandmother's aunt was into old world magic and decided to take me when I hit kindergarten. Things got easier as I learned control. I very nearly lived a normal life after that. The wife sighs deeply. This must be hard for you. I pause. It can be. But then sometimes I get to save people's lives. I smile. Talk turns to the mundane. Our jobs, their children, our dogs and cats, their family and business. A bookstore in a tiny California town tucked into the redwoods. We should come visit it. Numbers and addresses are exchanged, and we begin to leave. Check in on the clerk. If you're down this way again, I ask. I know he's all right. I got a sense he was tougher than he looked and pragmatic. He didn't want trouble. He wanted to run his business and raise his family. Malia turns on the car and away we go, back into the desert darkness. We'll find some place to bed down for the night. Hopefully the rest of our trip will go smoothly. Hopefully. Alice is telling the guys she doesn't know that she wants to see the end of the world. They aren't talking to her. No one is talking to her. The party happens around her without touching her, as if she is hermetically sealed. Outside, it's snowing. She pauses for a second on the patio, next to the four kids smoking and discussing Nike Roe movies. Timeslip crushes on Julie Christie. They don't notice Alice. The falling snow looks like pieces of something that exploded in the sky and is now drifting downward. She pushes the rubble off her shoulders and hair. She walks into the woods. The forest is behind the house having the party. Typical semester break thing, everyone home from school and getting drunk with old friends they hate. This is the new growth exurbs, the homes of the parents with 2-hour commutes and kids raised by daycare. These woods Alice is walking into are the old growth forests. These are the woods that have always been. The trees are all white, with stark dead branches for arms. It's here, out on the margins of the forest, where she first saw the white thing. Her footsteps crunch and press into the bright ground. Motion detector lights pick up on the way she walks, like a magnet being thrown at a refrigerator. Her bright red ballet flats look like she's bleeding, but the only trail is her footsteps. How does the Little Mermaid story really end? Not the Disney version, the first version, the real version. What happens to Ariel again? What always happens to girls in fairy tales? You watch her walk out of the party and off the patio and through the backyard and into the trees. You say hi to the smoking kids. They look like fireflies in winter. You're friends with Nate and he's there. You just quit smoking. You want to smoke 1 billion cigarettes. You just ask Nate for one. Out in the yard, the snow looks like jigsaw puzzle pieces. The only way you know how to build them is to find the flat edges and build borders first. These snowflakes melt on your hand before you can see where they fit. You hate these parties. You're trying to stay sober and it's awful. All these kids with their jello shots and jello laughter and jello thighs. You just got out of treatment. Treatment wasn't cool. You shouldn't be here, not right now. Edward, the counselor at the center, always said when you leave treatment imagine that you are in Italy. Because you were in a very fragile place in your recovery. You hate people who say things and wait for you to laugh. You know Alice in this really shallow way. If she's the pond, you're the rock skimming across the surface. You went to high school with her and had a muted crush on her. You didn't have any classes together because she had it together while you had it unraveled. There was this phenomenal distance to her that you found fascinating. Like she didn't belong to the world. Your world anyway. Now your world is dry and boring. You watch everyone around you unravel recreationally. Friday night for them can be drinks and no consequences. For you, alcohol is the accelerant in the abandoned building of your heart. You as a building on fire. You haven't seen the white thing, which is your neighborhood's ex-urban legend. Friends have though. Mallory claims she saw it coming home from the beach, the night she stranded everyone there, because Gray was hooking up with that girl with the bleached hair and teeth the color of surrender flags. She thought it was a weird white deer. Connor almost hit it driving home drunk one night, he alleged. Everyone thinks that's what he did. Hit the one night he wasn't so lucky. He said it was a freaky white worm thing, like a great pale caterpillar at the edge of the woods, suddenly visible as he drove by. The most detailed report of the white thing was Nate's version. The fact that he was on massive amounts of acid should be taken into account, but still, in Nate's words. Everybody else had gone back inside the house to watch a movie. Donnie Darko LOL. I'm super fucked up and I want to go for a walk. It's beautiful outside. It's late, but I'm walking very carefully on the shoulder of Route 39. The snowflakes look like stars landing on the street. Then I remember Mallory telling that weird story about that thing she saw. All of the sudden things feel off. Like the temperature changed, or the streetlights started making a different noise. There are no cars, either. None. You can see the traffic lights swinging, one side blinking red, the other yellow. And then, they're under those lights, in the middle of the road, down the hill. You could see it. The white thing. The thing moved weird. I guess it was hopping? That sounds so fun, so carefree. It wasn't carefree. It wasn't carefree. It wasn't fun. This wasn't marbles and hopscotch shit. You could tell its body was big and lumpy. And it was white, like fur, I guess, but dingy. Like a faded outfit. I think it was about 80 feet away, and it looked at me. Big, weird ears or horns or something flopped on top of its head. And then it cocked its head to the right, and just stopped. I felt like I could feel all the air around me, like the individual particles of the air. I could tell it was looking at me. Its eyes, I know I was too far away to see them, but I could. They looked like huge circular swimming pools, filled with black rotten water. I could smell it too, like spoiled meat cooking. That's when it held out its hand, standing there, under those swaying traffic lights. I just stood there, unable to move. It wanted me to come to it. It wanted me. And then, there's a car, out of nowhere behind me. Honking and skidding, and then coming to a stop like 10 feet past me. This dude gets out, screaming at me, telling me I'm in the middle of the street, he could have killed me. And I'm just screaming back to him about the fucking rabbit, and he's like, what fucking rabbit? And I'm like, that big fucking rabbit under the lights, and he points down the hill screaming, there's no fucking rabbit, you crazy motherfucker. And of course he was right, no fucking rabbit. Nothing, but I don't drive on that road anymore. Ever. All Alice ever sees is the color. Back when she was a kid, in her booster seat of her parents' SUV, she remembered vivid flashes of white whenever they were driving past long stretches of forest. At her bedroom window, when she was little, right before she fell asleep, the white would creep up the glass. She had weird dreams as a kid, deer with their legs caught on some fence, decaying, GMO wheat twisting into fields, drilling trucks pouring hot diseased runoff into the lakes, and always bursts of white. The white thing started coming in her window when she turned 12. It was the color of bone. It never said anything. It pulled her blankets down. She started not being able to sleep. Whenever she did, she'd have these ultra-vivid dreams of subdivisions on fire. White fires burning blocks all the way down to the ground. In the clearing of the forest, where kids come to smoke pot and make out, she sees the white thing, just where it said it would be. It touches her. The pine trees and white birches bend around her. In the dead of the living forest, the white thing talks to her in whispers made of the echoes of bulldozers and the scratch of blueprints for new homes. You watch. She's holding a gasoline can, now, the kind people use for their lawnmowers. The whispers are an orchestra made of crickets and cicadas. Alice is walking away now. She doesn't look at you. Her red shoes are little fires at the edges of things as she walks back to the party. It's still snowing, and the snowflakes are all over the trees and you in the ground. The white thing steps on them as it walks to you, breathing heavily, its body distorted and luminous. The snowflakes don't look like anything anymore. They blow in the wind, spiraling above the flames and the sirens and the illuminated evening, falling over everyone and everything, bright and cold and white. In a dream, Joseph saw himself sleeping, his 12-year-old body tucked in a thick comforter on top of his old hand-me-down mattress. Even as he stood by his bedside, looking at himself, he could feel the warmth of the comforter. Curious, he thought to himself, he decided to explore this dream. He looked out his window, the moon still bright, and with a bit of concentration he passed through the window, like a ghost in a movie. Gently floating to the ground from his second-floor room, in the way gravity's laws hold no sway over a dreamer, he explored the empty streets as snow started to fall. With great leaps he could almost fly, floating as he ignored gravity and the rules of the wakening world. The streets were dark and only the sound of an occasional car could be heard in the distance. Joseph did not feel the night chill he should have. After a little time of playing and exploring, he saw something. Down the darkly lit street was a figure, a silhouette of a child no older than him. The figure had no facial features and appeared to be a black mass only in the shape of a boy. It turned even without eyes. Joseph could tell it was staring at him. Unnerved by the figure, Joseph ran home, moving faster than his wakening legs would manage. He never looked back to see if he was followed, stopping when he reached the front of his house. Standing on the front steps was his mother. The tall, blue-eyed woman was smoking a cigarette in her pajamas, breaking another promise to quit. As she dropped the ashes into the flower pot next to her, Joseph wanted to yell at her. However, he quickly found he had no voice. As he tried to gain his mother's attention, he found she did not notice him at all. She tossed the last of her cigarette into the flower pot before going back inside. Joseph followed inside as well, and walking back to his room was the last thing he remembered before being awakened by the sun in his eyes. As he walked out the door the next morning, he nearly forgot his dream. In the flower pot by the door there is a cigarette bud. She really is smoking again, he thought to himself with a sigh as he made his way to the bus stop. It wasn't till lunch that he noticed how tired he was. Unable to keep his eyes open any longer, he fell asleep right in the cafeteria. Once again he dreamed. He saw himself face down in his chair and the spitballs on his back from the kids at the table behind him. He watched the room a bit before moving out of the cafeteria. Unsure where to go, he moved to his next class. There he saw Miss Frances teaching the class on the schedule ahead of him. They looked to be taking a pop quiz. Joseph felt dread at the thought. Once again, none of the kids or the teacher noticed him as he moved between desks, looking over each of his peers' shoulders. Bored of school, he decided to move outside. He put his hands to the window, ready to float out them like he had done before. However, he noticed a dark figure just below. It was the faceless child again, crawling up the wall as it were the floor. It was on all fours now, looking even less human, with extended arms and fingers that ended in points like one large claw. Joseph almost fell out of his chair as the loud ringing noise of the bell went off. Once he stood up, he noticed the spitballs falling off his back. With a quick rub, he wiped the rest off angrily and moved on to the next period. There Miss Frances announced a pop quiz. The quiz read the same as it did before. Suddenly remembering the window, he ran over and looked down. Yet there was nothing there. The rest of the class stared at him. Mumbling, "Thought I saw something," he sat back down and took the quiz. Joseph, however, could barely write. He was starting to understand his dreams were more tied to reality than he thought. Over the next few days, Joseph went to bed earlier and earlier, looking forward to his dream-like playground. It was clear now that no one could see him in this state. He started with spying on his older sister as she spent time in her room, wakening and sneaking in the room later to confirm what he saw in his sleep. He did not see the dark figure for a few nights, and slowly stopped thinking about it, enjoying his newfound powers too much. However, each time he waked, the less sleep he felt like he had gotten. His mother noticed her sleepy child and decided to keep him home from school in fear of illness. Before today, most of his trips into the dream world had been at night. So Joseph did not put up a fuss when his mother put him back to bed. His body quickly dazed to sleep, while his mind, his spirit, like form, awoke. He only took one glance at his sleeping body before running off to the school. This time he was free, with no time limit to spy on his peers. He moved faster than he even realized, surprised when he was already looking at the front gates of the school. Looking up at his classroom on the second floor, his smile quickly turned to a frown as the creature was standing on the other side. Joseph turned around to run away, but stopped when he heard a loud smash. As the sound of glass landed on the ground, he turned around and saw his peers looking out of a broken window, confused, an angry teacher beyond them. Joseph was shocked at the realization this creature could affect the real world. As the weekend started, Joseph had doubts if he should still be exploring this dream world. Despite his fears, however, he was enthralled. At this point, he slept more than he was awake. He saw his monsters more than once, but managed to avoid it each time. This thing scared him, but it too was part of this dream world that fascinated him. He found it could change its shape, sometimes looking more human, more like a child. Other times it looked completely inhuman, like a dark beast. He always watched from a distance and ran away when it noticed him. If he was cornered, Joseph found he could force himself awake. He was addicted to the dream world. His overworked mother failed to notice, and his teenage sister was too wrapped up in her own life to notice her oversleeping little brother. It was a cold night. Joseph was busy playing in the snowy streets when he noticed the creature once again. This time it was looking right at him, standing in front of his house. It turned and walked through his front door. Panicked, Joseph thought it was going after his mother or sister and ran after it. He quickly checked his mother's room, but no sign of it. Then he looked in on his sister, but still not there. Joseph felt relieved for a moment before remembering that he still had his own body, sleeping soundly in his bed. Rushing into his own room, he saw the creature sitting on the floor, looking like a human child without a face. A soft glow was next to him on the corner of Joseph's bed. A smile formed on the creature where there was no mouth before. On the floor next to his hand was Joseph's mother's lighter. Joseph could feel warmth in his feet and saw the glow for what it was, fire. He immediately tried to wake up, but he couldn't. The oil-like child got up off the floor and walking right through the wall. Joseph could not see it, but the newly formed mouth never left the shape of a smile. In a matter of moments, the fire spread over the old mattress. Joseph could feel the flames. He felt the burns and he screams in agony, but makes no sound. He ran to his mother's side, trying desperately to wake her. All of his words were without sound, and she slept soundly as her son burned to death. The neighborhood was awake that night, watching firemen come into and out of their neighbor's house. A teenager and middle-aged woman were saved thanks to smoke detectors, but the firefighters could do little for the boy whose room the fire started in. The firefighters had seen this sort of thing before, an unwatched child playing with fire and an old mattress. Yes, this was likely another case of the same. Unknown to everyone else, however, there was someone else watching. Joseph watched as he saw his mother and sister crying, begging for them to notice him. The following randomly appeared in my Gmail inbox in 2016. I have no idea who sent it, and I have no idea why it was sent to me of all people. All I know is what it said. I know the real reason why Silent Hills was canceled. For those who aren't into video games, I'll give you a Cliff Notes background from 2012 to 2015. There was a new Silent Hill game in development. In addition to noted game designer Hideo Kojima, many auteurs of horror were involved, including manga artist Junji Ito and filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. In August of 2014, a playable teaser was released, simply titled PTT. It was widely acclaimed and generated a ton of hype surrounding what fans were sure would be the best installment of the Silent Hill saga. And then, in 2015, Japanese entertainment conglomerate Konami suddenly canceled the project. Amid widespread criticism from fans, PT was removed from the PlayStation Store and made impossible to reinstall. Initial news reported that Konami was dissatisfied with the direction in which Kojima was taking the franchise. As time went on, the news changed its tune, saying that the game was canceled due to corporate reshuffling at Konami. Both of these statements are false. I know because I was involved in the game's production. If you look at the Wikipedia page for Silent Hills, you'll see under cancellation that video game website Polygon reported getting an anonymous tip confirming that the game had been canceled. I was the one who gave them that anonymous tip. I did it because I need people to know the truth. Of course, no one believed me, so it was never actually published. So I decided to send the story to someone at random. Maybe you can help me. The truth of the matter is the game was canceled because, to put it simply, we went too far. Early on in development, someone involved with the production of PT decided to do something a little different. They designed it so that the main ghost, Lisa, would follow the player throughout the game, causing scary noises and shadows throughout the teaser. Of course, the player only looks forward, so the model of Lisa is never actually seen. There was a lot of talks about wasting time developing a model that would constantly follow the player without being seen, when it could have easily been done with simple sound design and effects, but ultimately they decided it was best just to leave be. Big mistake. As the teaser was developed, many of us of course would test it to make sure it was going well. Anyone who played it was immensely excited at first. We knew we had a massive hit on our hands. As time went on though, the people who play tested the teaser started coming into work exhausted. At first, we just figured they were overworked. Creating a video game is extremely intricate work, and developers spend long hours trying to perfect every little detail, especially with a release of this magnitude. And then, One day, one of the developers, whose name I won't disclose here, didn't come in at all. Those of us who knew him were immediately worried he wasn't the kind of guy to just up and miss work. We called him numerous times, but there was no answer. Eventually, one of the other developers, who was friends with the missing guy, called his wife to ask whether or not he was okay. After the call, it was said the man's face was a picture of shock. The man hadn't come into work because the previous night he'd gone down into his basement and hung himself from one of the rafters. Worry turned into shock, shock into sorrow, sorrow into grief. The man had no history of depression or anything that could have led to suicide. A week later, another person didn't show up. The first death was still fresh in our minds, so we tried to prepare ourselves for what we assumed was inevitable. Sure enough, about an hour into what would have been their shift, we got a phone call from the person's family. The night before, they had made their way to the roof of their apartment building and jumped. I was there when we got this news directly. I remember one of the people in the room muttering to themselves, "What the fuck is going on?" If I have to be honest, and I do, I think a good many of us knew in the back of our minds what was going on, but we didn't want to accept it. At one point, someone from the Public Security Intelligence Agency, Japanese FBI, visited us to interview us and get any info they could about the people we'd lost. I'm pretty sure they were dissatisfied with what they got, but while I was talking to them, I couldn't help but feel like they weren't telling us everything. I mean, I guess I should have expected as much. What intelligence agency tells its people everything? But it definitely aroused suspicion. It wasn't until 3 more people died that we got the email. Before one of the people killed themselves, they sent something to our office's email address. I never actually got to see it for myself, but one of the people who handles our emails is a friend of mine, and she did get to see it. According to her, it simply reads, "She won't stop following me. I can feel her breath on the back of my neck. Can't keep doing this. Goodbye." It wasn't long after that we got word that the game was being canceled. All of our progress over 3 years was gone, and at that point I think most of us were more relieved than disappointed. Whatever was going on needed to stop, and damn the expense. I couldn't bring myself to go to the first few funerals. I know that's selfish, but what can I say? I didn't want it to be real. Eventually I made the effort to go to the funeral of the man who had sent the email. His wife was inconsolable. It wasn't until halfway through the service that she managed to get any kind of words out. I went up to her to pay my respects, and out of nowhere I remember asking her why she thought it had happened. She was obviously taken aback by my answer, but being the strong woman she is, she wiped her tears and told me. She said that for a year or so before his death, the man had had a lot of trouble sleeping. He had never had issues with insomnia before, but suddenly he was lucky to get as much as 3 hours. As time went on, he just got worse and worse. He became frightened of his home after dark. Sometimes he'd even go stay at a hotel just to avoid being in the house after sundown. He started rapidly losing weight. His eyes were in a constant glaze, as if he was constantly staring into something beyond what anyone else could see. The one time his wife got up the nerve to ask what was wrong, the man uttered one word, "Lisa." It wasn't long after that he killed himself. The wife told me point blank that she wondered if she'd been responsible, but I assured her she wasn't. I gave her a hug and said goodbye. I don't think any of us were surprised when PT was removed from the PS Store and made unable to download. I like to think they did it for the right reasons and not for problems with public relations. Although none of us ever said anything about it to each other, I think we all knew. We'd let something loose. I didn't believe it at first. How could I? Then, the other night, as I was making my way towards my bedroom, I felt the unmistakable tingle of cold, fetid breath down the back of my neck. I turned around with a start. Nothing was behind me. I know what's to come, and I am terrified. The email ended there. I couldn't make heads or tails of it at first. I was sure it was a friend playing a prank or something. I archived the email and pretty much forgot all about it. Then, in 2019, an indie developer named Lance McDonald used what he called camera patches to allow the player in PT to look 360 degrees. As it turns out, after a certain point in the game, the ghost, Lisa, actually does follow directly behind you throughout the rest of the teaser. That reminded me of the email, which I'm really glad I saved. I still don't exactly know what this means, and I'm all the more afraid because of it.